This video is when an issue arises during rent increase time, or perhaps the renters are asking for so much of maintenance. Some of the rental providers have advised some of the rentals team that we see things floating around in the industry that if the renter is not agreeing to the rent increase or would love to come back and negotiate a little bit on say $10–15 per week here and there, some of the rental providers have asked questions where can we get them out of the house, or perhaps serve a notice to vacate and find another tenant and advertise the property for more. I would love to make this video to give you a little bit more clarity on it. Number one thing is that under the legislation and with the vacate, you cannot just issue a notice to vacate to the renter without a specific reason. Some of the main reasons are rental providers selling the property has been sold and the final condition has been met, or an unconditional contract has been entered into, or perhaps rental provider moving in, 90 days notice before first fixed 12 months lease without reason, you can serve that. There's renovation, demolition, and again, there's a lot of paperwork and supporting evidence document are must with these notices, because if you don't provide these notices along with the evidence and factual documents, then your notice is considered to be null and void. So what happens is that if you serve a notice to a renter without enough sufficient documentation, and the documentation must have the wordings in such a way which is prescribed by the legislation and jurisdiction. If that is not the case, you can fall into a pit where the renter who's aware about their rights and knows the paperwork may not choose to vacate the property. So let's come back on the process of how the process works, because this video is not about when the renter not leaves the house after getting the notice. Let's go back. So I'll explain a little bit more around that. When a renter is not agreeing to rent increase or asking for too much maintenance, number one thing I would say is that it's not that person, it's just the personality of that person. You may have to be smart, like a good negotiator, and understand why that person's asking for a discount. Perhaps your team as property management department would also understand what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. So work with them and try to understand what is the right thing for you financially as well, because some of the times it is better to negotiate $5 down, or perhaps offering some other uplift onto the property. Say for an example, an upgrade which actually goes into your house is sometimes a better off opportunity rather than negotiating on the rent. Or if you feel the renter is really good, and by the time you go into the market again, spend advertisement, holding cost, and or perhaps the vacancy of the property itself may cost you a lot more, you have to weigh a few different options as well. So again, I'm not about one or the other. I'm all about practicality and understanding the situation at that given time for that particular property and that particular scenario. So there's different options. So the answer to the question is that can we serve a notice to the tenants if they just don't agree to rent increase? The answer is no, you can't just serve a notice because they disagree with your rental increase. However, what I can say to you is, if you send a notice to rent increase, right, you don't really have to negotiate if you don't want to. So long the renter comes back and asks for a rent increase, you can always refuse it. There's no questions about that, because rental increase come into effect based on the notice date. However, the renter can challenge that with the consumer affairs, can actually raise a compliance to review the rent increase, whether the rent increase has been reasonable and proportionate or not. And if that happens, then consumer affairs would ask for some detailed information, your information on the mortgages, your outgoings and reasoning, and then comparable analysis reports based on what notice or the reports that you have served, based on what calculations you've done the increase of the rent. So there's a lot of different things that play in the back end when it comes down to legislations and consumer affairs with rental properties these days. So when you do what you do, just think carefully, and it affects your financial goals. So it's all coming down to yourself and your personal self. Have a good team of property management department and or property management rental team who knows and understands, are mature enough to understand the scenarios and get through the results. Thank you.